Hello and welcome to this webinar on the topic of Gluware 4.0. We're very excited to bring this new release to you and educate you on the new features and capabilities. I am Michael Howe, VP of Product Marketing, and we have a lot to cover, so let's get started.
So before we jump into the new features in Gluware 4.0, let's talk about the problems that we're helping to address in the marketplace. And those challenges really come from the operating and managing large complex networks. The challenge of it comes from the fact that most networks are multi-vendor. You have multiple domains with the WAN, LAN, data center, campus, now cloud domains. A lot of the way we manage the traditional networking is via CLI, and it's manual. And this manual effort leads to manual errors. You could leave vulnerabilities open in your network. It's going to cause outages and downtime, which is very costly to the business. And the approach over the past 5+ years have been to apply programming via coding and scripting to be able to actually build scripts to automate the network. And this hasn't been proven to be highly effective because you have to transition network engineers to become programmers, and then you have to build, test, maintain, and continue that in a life cycle, and you ultimately become building software when your primary business is probably not even doing that. Another result of that is oftentimes through human error or even script errors, the network is taken out of policy. So this can lead to compliance problems or even other issues that could relate in outages and downtime. Lastly, with the pandemic upon us in 2020, it has really shined a light on the need for urgency when network changes need to be made. You can't necessarily stop everything and allow a team 6 weeks to develop a script and another 2 weeks to test it and a few more weeks to roll it out. You need a platform in place that enables you to automate the network very rapidly. So what Gluware offers is a layer of software that brings abstraction and order to that chaos of the underlying network. And so it's an intelligent network automation platform. It is built to handle multi-vendor. We're at nearly 30 operating systems. We'll get into that. It's multi-domain, being able to automate the LAN, WAN, campus, and now multi-cloud. We're going to talk more about that. The Gluware specialty is actually being able to automate what you have, the so-called brownfield. It's the network that's been deployed and been built over time. So you can automate as much as you need from day one or as little to automate the pain points and keep building off that. Another very important point is that Gluware is intent-based. It is declarative in the sense that you define an intended state. It will read the current state compared to the desired state and implement the changes necessary to bring the network in policy with validation. So that component of being intent-based and declarative are really a highly valuable component that you don't have to build in all those pre-checks and post-checks when you want reliable programming. Also, with Gluware, you are able to continuously optimize your network. You're monitoring your inventory, you're monitoring your networks for config drift, you're auditing, and you can even integrate auto remediation to reprovision the network and bring it back into policy at a moment's notice. So with that agility brought, you can stay ahead of your business demands. You can enable your operations team to effectively implement network changes without the manual errors. You keep that network in policy, you keep it secure, and you have the agility in place to automate anything the business demands, even when it's highly unplanned like the pandemic has shown us. So when you start looking at the Gluware platform, you'll see that we've provided intent-based applications to deliver turnkey functionality and to help you automate without having to become a programmer. That usually starts with using our device manager application. This is where you're able to discover the network and then have the engine perform an interrogation to inventory all the details about all the hardware in your network. So this is a huge time saver when you're looking at just capturing exactly what's running in my network. Moving up the stack, the next step is usually the config drift and audit app. So it's a dual function app that monitors the network for config changes, and you get alerts in the UI as well as via email, and a very powerful platform to build your own audits without having to do any programming. So this is like CLI command-based audits with just regex. So you can easily build your own audits for your company policy or leverage examples Gluware has built for things like PCI DSS, NIST, the DoD STG, and more. So audit the network for your policy as well as for security. Those first two are read-only types of automation where you're discovering and gaining insight. Moving up the stack again, oftentimes customers use the OS Manager app next. OS Manager is an application that provides the ability to automate operating system upgrades, patches, or even downgrades. And this has really been a very important one as customers have been faced with having to do multiple upgrades a year on every device in their network. Again, moving up the stack is config modeling. Config modeling, we kind of consider this our superpower. This is the ability to automate any configuration policy. Gluware is able to deconstruct CLI into feature-based configuration and automate as much as you need or as few as you need, with recent successes where we've automated QoS and global networks, or automated SNMP, or automated syslog, or done things much more complicated you'll learn in this session, like automating EVPN-VXLAN. Next are workflows. Workflows is a mechanism for us to automate in any repeated procedure that you have. So it could be a troubleshooting procedure, it could be an operational deployment procedure. Whichever steps your operations is doing, taking multiple steps, we're able to automate that into a workflow. And finally, API integrations. API integrations usually kind of come in last, but this is where you're integrating with things like an ITSM or an IP manager or some other external component that you want to make or use Gluware in a programmatic fashion. So that's the API integration. So now with that base knowledge, let's talk about the three big buckets of what's new in Gluware 4.0. First of all, Gluware has expanded our market by offering a brand new SaaS offering. The SaaS offering is very exciting for us. We've had and still offer SaaS for legacy customers. This is a brand new Gluware Pro Next Gen SaaS offering, and we're going to go into the details of that. And we've also expanded our Gluware Enterprise. So Gluware Enterprise is for the biggest and most complicated networks. Gluware Pro is for your kind of medium to large networks that don't require as much flexibility from a deployment standpoint. So we'll dive into those details. Next, on the enhanced platform component, this is where you're going to learn a lot of the features that we've built into the Gluware software. And the Gluware software runs both, in the enterprise version and in Pro. So as we jump into the features, we're going to talk about the new multi-engine architecture, brand new features like dashboards that make it very powerful and interactive to use, protocol capabilities like EVPN-VXLAN automation, and numerous other features in the product like config search, ad hoc query, syslog integration, and more. And the third big bucket, it's around continuing to expand the multi-vendor story, multi-domain, and multi-cloud component of Gluware. So we've done a lot of work to expand our capability automating Aruba, HPE company, as well as Juniper, and we now are very excited to announce vendor adapter support for Terraform, which brings us automation of your infrastructure as a service in Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure, and Google's cloud platform. So it's a very big and exciting part of the announcement. So let's start jumping into the differences between Enterprise and Pro. Enterprise on the far right here is for global networks, and it's the most flexible option of Gluware. You can deploy Gluware really any way you like. Generally it goes on-prem. It's for very high-scale networks. It provides our highest level of support with 24/7, 365. Now let's look at the new Pro offering. With the new Pro offering, we're very excited to announce a free inventory component. So any qualified prospect can use Gluware for free for 1 year using our Device Manager app. The Device Manager gives you inventory, discover your network, perform very detailed inventory on your devices. And also it has several new features we'll talk about, including config search and device ad hoc query. So we're going to jump into that. But with that free inventory, you get Gluware free for 1 year with the Device Manager app, and you get a 45-day trial of config drift and audit. So we're confident that once you start using it, you're going to want to keep using it in your engineering and automation of your network. Moving on into the tiers, as you move up into the audit tier at $7.99 a month per device, this now gives you the full suite with Device Manager and Drift and Audit. So now you fully own those applications to continue performing that inventory, performing drift and audit on an ongoing basis. Moving up to the next tier called Automation, this adds the OS Manager app to fully be able to automate operating system changes. And then finally, the Advanced app at $20.99 per device per month brings in really the full suite, adding in config modeling, which again is where we are automating your configuration in an intent-based declarative way. So very excited to have a tiered offering. Especially Pro is a SaaS-based offering where we're handling the management of the application and the infrastructure for you, and you just turn the key and start automating your network. So let's dive deeper into Gluware 4.0 and the enhancements around our enterprise offering. First and foremost is the announcement of the Gluware multi-engine architecture with the new Gluware Zone Engine servers. So just to build off what we had released in the past, what we released in the past was the ability to install or run additional engine servers. Engine servers are the workhorse of Gluware. They do the interrogation for discovery, they run the drift, they run the audit. So essentially they are the job engines that execute when you execute a function from the Gluware server. So with the addition of the Zone Engine servers, this is a step for Gluware to really move the provisioning power into a specified zone. These zones are usually geographical regions, but they can be other things like a specific data center or any specific location with a set of devices. So what happens with Gluware Enterprise is you have your primary orchestration engine server, which is on the top here in the cloud, and you can run it anywhere. Most our customers choose to run on-prem, but you can run in your own cloud, you can run in AWS or Azure or Google, whatever you like. We deliver software as an OVA or a virtual machine image, and you have your primary server and you have your backup server, which is a warm backup in the sense that the database is synchronized. So if you ever need to switch over to your alternate instance, you can do that. Now, with the addition of the Gluware Zone Engine servers, you install that virtual appliance wherever you need it, closer to the devices. And then with the devices near that region, you assign the Zone Engine as the primary server for those jobs. And therefore, when Gluware is instructing to run an audit or run a provision to change configuration, the jobs will be distributed down to those local provisioning engines, and the SSH to the devices and all of that job information will be handled there, with only the control information going back over an SSH session to the primary orchestrator. There's numerous forms of redundancy built into this design. You can have numerous at really no limit to the amount of Zone Engine servers you install, as well as you could have jobs fail back from a Zone Engine all the way back to your primary orchestrator. So it is scalable to tens of thousands of devices, and you can rest assured that the data, like IP addresses, usernames, anything you're using, is secure in transit and at rest. We encrypt our database messages while they're in transit, and we encrypt the databases at rest as well. Okay, so jumping into the Gluware Pro offering, Gluware Pro is a bit more cookie cutter. You got to kind of fit in the mold and be the right fit for a customer to choose Gluware Pro. So some of those choices involve, or the deployment model is, Gluware Pro is hosted in our AWS instance. So it's our multi-tenant instance on which we load and build out an organization that makes you logically separated from any other instance running in Gluware. So it is a multi-tenant software as a service option only. Now, the multi-engine architecture component Gluware brings is called the Gluware Secure Gateway. So Gluware Secure Gateway is like a Zone Engine. However, it is allocated into one customer network only. You install your virtual appliance, which is your Gluware secure gateway, and you put your credentials in. It essentially connects up and associates with your AWS instance and automatically, allocates and assigns itself into that instance, and you're up and running. So there's very little setup that you have to do. You essentially just associate with your Gluware secure gateway up into your AWS instance, and then you log in to your Gluware control up in the AWS cloud, and you're off and running. Some similarities to Enterprise is that the Gluware secure gateway handles all the local provisioning to the devices on your network, and you can have two Gluware secure gateways, giving you more scale as well as more redundancy, because jobs will only be assigned to a Gluware secure gateway that is up and running. And then only the control messages go over that SSH session up to your instance in AWS. So it is, again, being a SaaS, there's a lot of advantages to that. Gluware is maintaining a highly available AWS instance that is running across multiple regions. We have database synchronization. We're using elastic load balancing and other factors that AWS provides to have high performance and scalable offering delivered from the cloud. One constraint is that the Gluware Pro is currently designed for organizations up to 2,000 devices. So each tenant or each customer Gluware runs in the multi-tenant infrastructure can be up to 2,000 devices today. And as I mentioned before, it is still true that your data is encrypted in transit and at rest in the Pro distribution as well. Again, we use an SSH control session, which is secure, but the database and control messages are also encrypted. One of the most exciting features of the 4.0 release is the new dashboard framework. Dashboards bring a great visual element to Gluware and also help change the way you navigate and work with the product. So there's numerous pre-seeded dashboards for administrative purposes as well as per application. The dashboards are also fully customizable. So they're made up of widgets, and you can drag and drop in the widgets that you want to see the information you'd like to display, and then save it and make it private for your own use or share it with your organization. It's also light and dark modes if you prefer the dark mode view. And there are numerous widgets for text notes, web pages, RSS feeds, user information, and numerous other features that make it highly useful within the new application. One of the most powerful components of the Gluware 4.0 release is the new multi-vendor reference design package for automating EVPN-VXLAN. So EVPN-VXLAN has become a really transformative technology to modernize data center and campus networks. Leading vendors like Arista, Cisco, Juniper, and others have built-in support. This first release from Gluware supports Arista, Cisco, and Juniper. So we have support for the standards-based leaf-routed or edge-routed bridging, as well as the Juniper centrally routed bridging feature. A key component to know about Gluware's implementation is that we're actually able to automate EVPN-VXLAN networks you've already deployed. So that's the so-called brownfield. But we can also automate greenfield and automate the underlay in your IP routed network as well as your overlay VXLAN and then the tenant networks. I'd like to point you towards a case study we recently did with a customer who spoke on our behalf at ONUG. You can see the video on our website as well as onug.net. And this customer, Acuity Insurance, had already deployed EVPN-VXLAN, or really kind of just struggling to automate that churn of the app teams needing new VLANs deployed in the network or new VLAN or VLANs being terminated. So it was that churn. When you modify or add a VLAN in Juniper CRB, you have to modify every leaf node as well as every spine node, which can be dozens of lines of config per device. So they were struggling with scripting it. They wanted a more intelligent way, and they wanted a way to be programmatic and interact with Gluware even via API. And in this case, they wanted Gluware just to automate the tenant network side and not touch the overlay. And what Chris DiPiola shared with us at ONUG or through ONUG was that it was the high degree of flexibility that Gluware offered to meet his network challenges. So if you're interested in EVPN-VXLAN, check out our new support for that protocol package. Gluware 4.0 also introduces a number of additional enterprise class features, beginning with config search. This is the ability to search across all the configurations that Gluware has captured and identify devices that have particular config strings. It's very useful for troubleshooting, as well as the new ad hoc query capability. Ad hoc query allows you to search configs for parameters, but also operate or execute show commands to capture configuration state. So we're going to take a look at that in a live demonstration. Another new integration is with syslog. So Gluware now integrates syslog capability. We're first focused on messages of type 5, which are generated when someone goes into configuration mode on a device. So we're able to capture that message and then provide real-time multi-vendor change notification of when someone is doing that. And the way Gluware is doing that is when you enable syslog on a per organization basis, we're spinning up a containerized version of syslog ng, which becomes the listener or the server for that org. And again, it's a very useful integration. This release also has a lot of enhancements to our OS Manager app and the underlying engine, which enables it to upgrade much more complicated environments like stacks, chassis, and clusters. We've also done a lot of work with platforms from HP Aruba as well as Juniper to perform and automate those operating system upgrades and changes. The audit application, the config drift and audit application, adds several new capabilities to define more complex rules and more cases. So it really can just help you speed and simplify your audit creation. This release adds user-defined system banners. So this sounds kind of trivial, but a lot of organizations require a notification when you log into systems that you're using for network management. So you can customize that banner and give anyone a legal disclaimer or any information you need to know when you're signing into the Gluware system and you're in that particular instance of Gluware. And then next is we've added the ability to capture the Cisco license inventory report. So this was a customer use case where they were getting audited and having to kind of take care of understanding exactly what they had in their network for a SmartNet contract upgrade or status. And so Gluware extended the device detect library to execute the various show license commands and then capture them in the database and be able to generate a report. So within a few clicks, you can generate the Cisco license inventory report, which has become pretty important for quite a few customers actually recently. We have a quote here from Mike from First Bank, and you'll have to listen to the episode he did with us on packet pushers recently. But he was really impressed and saying, essentially, since the time he's been able to use Gluware in the network, it's changed the way they do business. So it's really fundamentally changed and enabled software control for things like inventory and audit and config management and OS upgrades. So it's a really good listen if you have time to check out that Packet Pushers podcast. So this slide kind of shows you the big picture about what vendors and platforms Gluware can work with when we talk about automating multi-vendor and multi-domain networks. You can hear from several of our success stories recently. With Acuity Insurance, it was automating the data center. With First Bank, it was automating campus and branch. And there's many others we're looking forward to sharing with you. This 4.0 release really expanded our support for Aruba, adding the Aruba OS CX, Aruba OS Switch, and the ProVision, or the ProCurve product lines and operating systems. We also did a lot of work expanding our support for Junos across the EX, SRX, MX, and QFX platforms. Another big piece of this I talked about a little bit in the introduction was bringing on the ability to leverage Terraform as a vendor adapter. And with that Terraform support, we focused on 3 of the main cloud vendors first, with AWS, Google Cloud, and Microsoft Azure. And also, it's not new in this release, already or previously released, we have Ansible integration with support for plugins and modules to do things like inventory and integrated drift and audit when you're running Ansible playbooks. So to dive a little bit deeper into the new multi-cloud network automation framework, customers have been driving Gluware towards this because they're automating their on-prem networks with Gluware, and as they look at automating one or more clouds for infrastructure as a service. They really want to automate that policy and network capability as it extends into the cloud. Several prospects we're working with were already looking at Terraform or beginning to use Terraform because it does provide that abstraction and the ability to automate multi-cloud through consuming those cloud APIs. So as mentioned, although Terraform has many providers at this point, and a provider is a connection or an interface that they're able to automate, the three we're focused on initially is at Amazon, AWS, Google Cloud Platform, and Microsoft Azure. The nice thing is when you look at the Terraform approach, it is actually very similar to the Gluware approach in that they have the ability to abstract, define infrastructure as code, and they take a declarative approach. So they're going to check the state of a previous provisioning and only apply the changes needed to reach the desired state. And that is very synergistic with how Gluware approaches it. And so it is integrated into our config modeling solution. So reading this slide, you may have a lot of synergies with what's happening within your organization. What we're hearing from a lot of our prospects and existing customers is that they are moving to the cloud, and with the pandemic and other things, in a lot of ways it's accelerating the move. So they're adopting a cloud-first strategy. Cloud can mean many things, but we kind of drop it into two buckets of software as a service or infrastructure as a service. These migrations offer flexibility, they offer scale, and they offer savings. That's why part of the reason why Gluware is now offering a SaaS. But Gluware also automates the network infrastructure to speed the adoption of cloud. And we had a great case study from Merck back in the 2017 timeline of automating the network infrastructure to accelerate their move to the Azure cloud. So when you think about automating infrastructure as service, enterprises are adopting it, and although they're adopting these public clouds, what's happened in a lot of organizations is it's been the app teams or some DevOps teams that were early adopters, and their focus was on the application side, and they weren't really, let's say, tightly controlled on the network side. So what's happened in some cases are the network rules and permission aren't consistent when you look at policy from on-prem to the network policy as it extends into the cloud. So now the NetOps team must manage the network to the cloud or connections to the cloud, but also manage the networking components in the cloud. So Gluware is unique in that we can offer the unification of automation of the on-prem network and also have consistent policy as you look to manage your network resources as they expand into those public clouds. So that's really the key driver in that, having a common approach for NetOps to automate both, on-prem and in cloud. So unfortunately, I don't have a live demonstration to show you this time around. It's kind of too big of a topic. We're going to actually do a dedicated webinar, most likely in our next session here in the beginning of 2021. But let me run through you a bit of what our Terraform integration looks like. Well, in Gluware, as you know, we talk to network endpoints. Well, instead of talking directly to endpoints, the networking endpoint, we're talking to an API endpoint. So within Gluware, you manage your credentials. So this is straight from your cloud providers. You're using an IAM credential, identity and access management. And then you're using your keys or API keys, credentials that are leveraged, right? And that is leveraged through the Terraform interface. So we support the Terraform CLI essentially. And in that Terraform CLI, you're defining, you use the Terraform just like you would natively, but what's happening is Gluware behind the scenes is wrapping it in our data modeling technology, which does allow for variables and abstraction, and we can do other things our users of config modeling will be very familiar with. So using Gluware, you'll be able to manage your kind of growing library of what are known as TF files or your Terraform files, and we're managing or maintaining the file structure and the state files that Terraform requires as well. So with Gluware, you'll be previewing, provisioning, and unprovisioning those infrastructure as a service cloud resources. So drilling down one step further, let's take an example of provisioning an AWS resource using the Gluware config modeling with the Terraform adapter. essentially in Gluware, again, instead of working with vendor CLI, now you're working with the Terraform commands. And so you use your Gluware config modeling to define those Terraform resources and parameters. So essentially everything in a Terraform file becomes a resource. So you have your VPC here, you have your internet gateway, you have your route table, and these things all become resources. And then once you're happy with what you're going to be provisioning, you're going to select what action you're taking with Gluware to provision or preview or unprovisioning. Then as you execute a provision, you're going to see all the detail from the Gluware logs you're used to. This time, instead of looking at it, interacting with a device, you're going to see all the interaction that we have with the Terraform adapter. And then once the provisioning completes, you can check in your cloud provider. In this case, we're looking at AWS, and we can see that the resources are created and provisioned. So it's bringing you the ability to take what you might be doing with Terraform open source or Terraform CLI and kind of bring it into Gluware to have management, and then being able to unify the policies and network configuration you're doing with your on-prem and manage your in-cloud network resources. So with that, let's jump into a live demo and take a look at some of the new features, starting with dashboard. Okay, here we are in the Gluware 4.0 UI. There's web page widgets, there's text widgets. Here's a user activity widget. I can see who's signed into the system. Now let's navigate into Device Manager. And this is the typical look of when you import devices or discover devices. You're going to see them in a grid-based format. Well, now you can navigate into your dashboards, and I'll use a shortcut key here to switch over into the My Inventory dashboard and see summary data, total device count, any device errors, a breakdown by device. Here's a breakdown by operating system version, and I can click into that and it will apply that same filter to that grid, and now I can see the filtered information available. Now let's switch back to my dashboards and navigate to another dashboard. Here we're going to look at the audit and drift alerts, where I can see my audit violations, what audits have run, if there's been any successful. Again, I can click in, it will navigate me into the audit, and I can navigate further into to see the details of that breakdown. Now let's jump again to the dashboards, and now we're going to go into the dashboard library. So you can see the default dashboards that are there, and now we're going to create a new dashboard named Demo. I'll click Next. I'm going to use the default image. I'll make a private dashboard. So these are the widget menu, and you can just simply drag and drop these widget constructs into your page and then customize them. This is a web page widget. I can put gluware.com in. I can drop in a count widget and then configure the count and choose my data set to be the number of devices with no additional filters. I can drop in the user activity widget. I can drop in a schedule and then move it around. Obviously, it's customizable to be exactly how you would like it laid out. Widen it. And so once I'm done with my edits, I simply publish it, and then it's available to me if it's private or available to others if it's published. Now you navigate into your profile, and this is where you have the option of changing or enabling it dark mode. Once you enable dark mode, the browser refreshes, and then when you bring up one of your dashboards, you will see it in dark mode for those that prefer that visually. For the second demo, we're going to jump into the syslog feature. So we're going to start here from another dashboard and then navigating to the requirements for syslog. You have to navigate into the system settings, and then on a per org basis, you want to come in. So I'm navigated to this particular organization. This is a small system with a single org on it, but you must be navigated into the org you want to enable syslog for. And then under organization, select the syslog menu and tick this box to enable syslog. What this does on the back end of Gluware is it spins up a containerized version of syslog ng, which is what we've instrumented as our syslog listener or syslog server. So we are turning on the ability to listen to syslog messages, and we're listening on port 32,000. So we are assigning a port number. That is important when you're configuring the devices for syslog. So that's step number one. Step number two is the devices themselves must be configured to send those syslog messages to the server. So let's jump into that. And since Gluware can automate configuration, we're going to go into the model editor and we're going to automate that config change using Gluware. So let's navigate to the node view. And here on this particular node, I have a assembly that includes the syslog policy. So if I double click in on this, what I do want to show you here is there are a couple key things required. First is the logging host must be pointed at your Gluware instance. So in my case, it's 10.255.150.99. You can see that matches my Gluware on-prem server here. Then you must indicate the transport UDP port and you must match the port. So we're sending those syslog messages to that server using that UDP port. So that is what must be configured. So I hit save. So let's go back to the node view, and I'm going to adjust my view a little bit here to view the assembly policy. And you can see I have that particular assembly tied to one device here. What I can do is if I want it on these other devices as well, which we'll go ahead and do. I'm going to leave the CSR1 out for now. That one's configured a little bit differently. So I'm going to say, let me bring back up this view to a multi-select. And then now what I want to do from an association standpoint is I want to assign them all global features with the syslog feature that I've configured. Hit save. So now all of those devices are assigned that set of features I'm automating. Now I come over into the tick box to provision. And in terms of provisioning, I'm going to provision the features. I'm going to skip the preview step since I know what changes I want to make, and I'm going to hit start action and proceed. So when the Gluware engine is provisioning or making those changes, you can scroll over in the grid view and see it kind of roll through that. So it's interrogating those devices. We use a declarative mode, so it's reading the current configuration, it's comparing it to the desired state, and it's going to roll through the features that we're automating, which is only one default policy there, and it's go through syslog, which you see now. And then I'm also updating the username configuration on these devices. So once that is done, only takes a few minutes, these devices are going to be configured to send syslog. And I'll see them all complete here. So okay, we're all completed here. So let's go back to something like Device Manager, and let's complete the third step to make sure you see the syslog activity. So anytime you're in a grid like the Device Explorer, which is in Device Manager and Config Drift and Audit and OS Manager, you can click on the cog here to determine what columns are shown. And what you want to make sure is configured info, configured type, configured by, configured on. These items, you want to make sure those are turned on in your grid. So if I scroll over here, I can see, the configured info, configured type, configured by, configured on. Okay, so now let's go ahead and trigger a syslog message from one of those devices. So to do that, I am going to bring up a PuTTY window, and I am going to just scroll back here where I can see. And if you need to connect into your devices and you don't know the information, you can double click in. I'm going to use this router ending in 152, and you should know your credentials, but I'm going to go ahead and SSH into that, emulating a manual change here. So 10.255.150.152. Okay, so going into config mode and then exiting config mode will trigger the syslog message. So all you have to do on a router, if a user is going into configuration mode, even if they do or don't change, if they go into config mode and they exit config mode, it's going to generate a syslog message. So now via the Gluware user interface, we should be able to see the syslog message once it's registered with our system. So I can see here the syslog message was captured, and I can see the configured info console by J Doe. So it was captured here. It's a syslog type configured by John Doe, and it has a timestamp here. So this is where the syslog integration comes in. You can see this on any of your integrated grids that you've turned on these columns. Also, if you double click on that device and you bring up the detailed screen here, when you scroll down, you're going to see a new section in the details of the config info, config type. So you're going to see that info here as well. So one more last note on it is that another tip or recommendation is that if you want to see this or see it more prevalent, you can also integrate it into your dashboard widgets. So if you have a grid and you have a grid of your devices, you can customize the columns available and also expose the columns for configured by, configured type, and configured info. So that pops up right here. You could even filter for specific types of messages. Let's say you're looking for those syslog triggers. You could even do a filter on this as well. So with that, this concludes the demonstration component of the syslog integration. For the third use case, we're going to start from the dashboard here, and we're going to take a look at config search and ad hoc query. So I'm going to navigate into one of the applications that has the Device Explorer to show you these features. So let's go into Device Manager, which is typically the starting point when you're beginning to work with your devices inside of Gluware. So here in Device Manager, I have 5 devices that have already been discovered, as well as snapshots have been taken. So as a quick reminder, when Gluware discovers a device, we perform a detailed inquiry on that device to capture its details. We also save the latest running configuration, which is called the latest snapshot. And to see that, you can double click on any one of these devices. Then its information appears in the top part of the grid. You then click on the configuration view, and you can see the last capture that occurred and the timestamp on that capture. So here you can see the whole configuration file. So new feature number 1 we're going to look at here is config search. Config search is now built into the search bar of your Device Explorer grid. So to execute a config search, instead of scanning manually through all the lines of the configuration, if you drop this search bar down and go into the search parameters, you're going to see a couple new options. One is latest snapshot, which is what I just described, and the second is the default snapshot. Because if you want Gluware to do periodic captures of and discovery of the configuration, as well as to specify a default, you do that in the config drift and audit application, which we're not going to cover here in this demonstration. So for this demonstration, we're going to be primarily working with the latest snapshot, which you see here. So select latest snapshot, and then you're going to see some different parameters. I find the 2 most useful you're going to find for searching configuration is either begins with, when you're using a config statement, from the beginning here, or a contains. So if I go back to latest snapshot and either begins with or contains, I'm going to start with begins, and let's take an example here where I want to see if any of my devices are configured for BGP. So I'm going to search for the string router BGP and hit apply. And I can see that 4 of my 5 routers, 1 disappeared, are configured for BGP. Let's execute another search. Instead of router BGP, let's take a look at NTP server and hit apply. And I can see all 5 of my devices are configured with NTP server. So another example is I can say contains, and I can put in an IP address like 10.255.150.1. I happen to know that's the gateway of last resort or the default route, and I can hit apply. And once again, all the devices have that. Anything that's left after you apply your filter, those devices have those configuration. So that's how you execute config search, is that search identifies the devices that meet that criteria. So let's take it one step further and go into our next feature, which is ad hoc query. So for ad hoc query, a very important first task is you have to click on one or more devices in the grid. So if I use the shortcut Control A, Control All, I select all my devices. Again, you must select one or more devices and then navigate into the icon here for ad hoc query. When you navigate into ad hoc query, you're going to see the query interface pop up on the top part of the grid here. And you have a few choices. You can do a new query, and any of the queries you saved are going to be available in this list. So let's start with the first part of query I described, which is searching for something in the configuration. So I'm gonna pull up a search called NTP server config. So I'm going to search my latest snapshot. I'm going to search the full configuration, and I'm going to search for NTP server. I just want to know, is NTP server configured and how it's configured? And I have all these devices here, and I'm going to execute run query. When you execute a search or query across your snapshots, it's going to execute very quickly because all those config files are already stored in the underlying database. So I can see on each one of these devices in this sample network here, I have 4 matches. If you want to see those, you navigate into the action view, and then if you've used Drift and Audit, similar interface where you can use the arrow keys, and it's going to show you where the matches exist. So I can see that my NTP is configured here, and there's 4 instances on this device, and I can navigate to another device, and I can see the same thing. So I'll jump back. That is how you execute a search of the config file. And again, this is regex capable. So let's take a more interesting view now. I know NTP is configured. I want to know what the NTP status is. So if we want to look at operational status, I'm going to pull up a config I saved, which is searching the device as a source. And I'm going to execute show commands, and I'm going to use show NTP status. So now I'm not just looking at config information. I want to know the status, and my query is clock is. Now I could take it one step further and be clock is synchronized or clock is unsynchronized, but I actually for this demo purpose, I want to see both. So I'm going to just hit run query, and I can see it's going to take a little longer when you execute a device query because the engine is executing an SSH session into those devices. It's executing those commands, pull results back, and then executing the query on the results. So if I look at my CSR 155 down here and I navigate into actions, I can see the output of the command, which I'm running a show NTP status, and I can see in green I matched the query. So clock is. So that's good. Now let's take a look at some of these other devices, and I can see clock is, and I can see all these are saying clock is synchronized. Let's take a look at CSR number 1, which it did not have results for this. Now I can see that while NTP is configured, the show NTP status is not returning a result. So this is the one, let's say if I was troubleshooting, this would be the needle in the haystack. So let's jump back and take a look at 2 more quick examples so you understand the feature a little bit better. Let's take a look at multiple shows searching for an IP. So again, I mentioned you can execute show commands. By the way, not just show, there's numerous other commands you can run, but these are deemed to be read-only commands for semantics on other device platforms that use like a display or other term. We are filtering because we don't want user to be able to execute like a reload or a write erase or anything destructive. So you will get an error if you try to run commands that are not supported. But here's running multiple show commands, and it's going to be a device query by show command. And I'm going to run 2 show commands. I want to look at the configuration using a show run, the show running config, and I want to look at the routing table using a show IP route. Now I'm going to use a little bit more sophisticated query using regex to search for a very specific IP, which is at 10.255.150.1. And so I'm going to go ahead and execute this query. And again, it will take a few minutes to run because in this case it is in parallel, it's accessing all these devices executing the show commands and capturing the results. And again, I can see I have results here, and I know, by the way, my network is configured. The CSR, this guy is a different config profile than these other ones. These other 4 are pretty uniform. But as I navigate into the results, I can see Gluware found the IP default route, which is good, and that's expected. If I navigate again, I can see that default gateway is also acting as an NTP server, which is great. And then I navigate again, and now I'm looking into the output of a show command, which is the show IP route, and I can see that IP is in my routing table. So that's great as well. So let's navigate up into the CSR and figure out why it's different. So I have the default route is the only output that I have. Oh, and it's tied to a VRF. So again, that particular router is different, and the static route is tied to a virtual routing and forwarding instance. And again, just an example of a useful type of query. And navigate back, and so that's kind of the summary of the ad hoc query. Is you're executing searches to search into the configuration or search into a running operational state. One very last quick thing to touch on is that if you want to use the Gluware concept items, I'm going to look at NTP concept item. So we're going to do a device search. We're going to use a concept item. A concept item, not to go into too much depth, it just means Gluware understands the feature, and we're going to look at the configuration, but we're only looking at a specific part of the configuration. So Gluware is looking to isolate the configuration for NTP, and I'm going to query again for NTP. So just to compare and contrast how these different operations run, we're going to run this query. So again, I'm doing a device query, so we're executing a command. We're looking at a show run, but looking at a specific section of the config, in this case for NTP, and then looking at the output. So the key difference to it is you're not searching the whole configuration, you're isolating to a specific part of the config you want to look at. And if I navigate in, you're going to see only a few lines here, because this is the section of the configuration I was using, isolating it by the Gluware concept item, which means we know how to look at this feature. So that is the summary or pretty quick summary highlight video here on the new config search and the ad hoc query function. Again, as a reminder that the query function can query the configuration information and also the state information using things like show commands. For the 4th and final feature in this webinar, we're going to take a look at the Cisco Extended License Inventory Report. So let's navigate into Device Manager and jump into these features. So in Device Manager, what you're going to see is you'll see all the devices that you've imported and most likely performed discovery on. If you see the grid populated here with a lot of information, discovery has already been complete, and I did recently run discovery on these devices. So just for the purpose that these 2 features I'm describing are specific to Cisco, I will go ahead and filter this grid to filter by vendor. So now I can take all my Cisco devices and look at them specifically. So now, looking at these Cisco devices, let's take a look at what some of these enhancements are around the detailed inventory. So let me double click into one of my switches here, the 2960, and you'll see the detailed information here in the device details view. And as I scroll down here, you're going to see a new field called components. So components, if it is a multi-chassis, multi-module type of device, you're going to see this populated with the hardware inventory. Let me see if I can find one that might be populated. Here's a Cisco 9K. And I can see here in the components, I have details like my power supply, the SKU, the serial number, the path, the type. So this is where the extended details come into when you're doing an extended inventory report. One other thing I want to touch on here is if I navigate into the activities, and I can see a discovered job has been complete here. You can always look into the details of a job and look at what Gluware did. So if we look at this job, the green text is highlighting response from the device. And I just want to show you real quick that we're capturing a show version and capturing all this output and saving it within Gluware. So we're already capturing information about the licensing here. You can see later on as we run additional information, run additional captures, you are running the show inventory, or show boot. I wanted to get down to where, show module, show switch, show license all. This is what we're automating to capture the output of the detailed license information. So here is really a key component of Gluware in terms of the device discovery that takes place when we interrogate a Cisco device. We're running additional commands to capture the extended inventory information and to capture the additional licensing information. So now let's navigate to data export. And here in data export, I use the drop down here, and I have a drop down for a Cisco extended inventory device list. I just run and download that, and you're going to see pop up in the bottom of your screen the Excel spreadsheet that's been generated, and I will open that once okay, and here's the extended inventory list that has been generated. And so you can see, I'll expand some of these columns here, but you can see the serial, the SKU, and many other details, the fan trays, the components. All of this detailed inventory has been captured and is available as an externally exported result. So very useful if you're trying to reconcile with, this is equipment running in your network versus what you might be paying for in a SmartNet contract. So let me close that report, and let's generate the next report, which is the Cisco inventory license list. So we select that data export, we say run and download. And if I take a look at this that has been created, I see all my license information available here, the feature set that's licensed, the status of it, if the EULA was accepted or not, and I can scroll through these and look at my inventory on what licenses are enabled, what EULAs are accepted, and you get the full inventory of your Cisco for all the supported devices that we have in this report. So with that concludes this demo. Thank you very much for your time and interest today in Gluware and our intelligent network automation solution. Hopefully you've seen the benefit of how we can help prevent outages, enhance security, increase agility, and improve efficiency for your network engineering and network operations teams. So to get started, go to gluware.com and you can navigate into our free offer to get free inventory for 100 devices for 1 year. That also comes with a 45-day trial of the Drift and Audit application. Another option is you can select the test drive. With the test drive, we'll spin you up a virtual environment and you can work through several use cases and get some hands-on time with Gluware without having to set up anything on your side. Or you can always request a demo and interact with our sales team. We can understand your use cases, your needs, your requirements, and see how we can help you automate your network intelligently. So thanks again for your attendance on this webinar. We appreciate your time and interest in Gluware. Thanks a lot.